Hi guys, and welcome to this other video. I hope you guys are doing great. So today in this video we are going to talk about FortiGate vDOMs. So we are talking about virtual domains. So during this video we are going to see the following objectives. So we'll see what is vDOM, how it works, what are some use cases of vDOM. We'll also talk about FortiGate vDOMs. We'll show a little comparison between FortiGate vDOMs and VLANs. So most of the time people might think there is a link. Maybe vDOMs is not much different from VLANs. So during this video, we'll show a comparison about the two technologies and the two features. So then next we are going to show the primary characteristics of vDOMs. And we're also going to show the prerequisite that we need to meet if you need to implement vDOMs on your environment. So this is a diagram that I just displayed so that we can have a global overview or understanding of what we are talking about. So from a FortiGate device, we'll be able to define multiple vDOMs, and on each vDOM, we'll be able to create multiple VLANs. So this is just an overview of the whole thing. So in the next slides, I'm going to go more in details about the explanation between VLANs and vDOMs. So as usual, at the end of each video, we are going to do activities. So for now, I've prepared these 4 activities. So these 4 activities are mostly related on vDOMs, but I will probably add 2 more activities related to VLANs on this list. So for now, we just have these 4 activities where in the lab 1 we are going to do an initial setup of vDOMs. In lab 2, we are going to see how vDOMs communicate. We'll see inter-vDOM communication, so how to establish link communication between 2 different vDOMs. At the lab 3, we are going to stand like an MSP. So you see how to create vDOMs for multiple clients. Then we'll see how routing and NAT or internet access works in this case. Then in the 4th lab, we are going to talk about segmentation. So this is going to be like in a company with different departments, let's say finance, HR, and engineering. Maybe you want to segment to isolate network traffic for each of these departments. So we'll see how to do that with vDOMs. So as I said, I'll probably add like two more labs on this. So those labs will be related to VLANs. So before entering the details of these activities, let's take a few minutes to explain some key concepts related to vDOM. So what is the vDOM? So vDOM is a security feature that allows a single physical FortiGate unit to be divided into multiple independent virtual firewalls. So look at it like on your workstation, for example, let's say you have a desktop on which you have like Windows 11. So on that Windows 11, you install like VMware Workstation 17 Pro. On that VMware Workstation 17 Pro, you now install multiple virtual machines. So you can install multiple virtual machines on that VMware Workstation. So the vDOM technology, I am just using that virtualization of virtual machines so that you understand how vDOMs work. So vDOMs is like the vDOMs that you have on your physical FortiGate device are like the VMs that you have on your physical computer, right? Let's take it like that. So on your physical FortiGate, for example, you need to assign maybe like some interfaces. Let's say if I'm using the image that I have here, you see, for example, on this physical FortiGate, I have like 3 vDOMs. So the vDOM A is a vDOM that was created for a particular company. Let's call it company A. So for that company, we assign them port 1, and we assign them also the port 1 for internet access. Same for company B. Then on the physical FortiGate, we have this root vDOM, where we can use this root vDOM to manage the physical device. So as we said, each of these vDOM is like an independent FortiGate. So it means for each of these vDOM, each vDOM will have its proper configuration, its network interfaces, its firewall policies, user accounts, and you can also, from the physical firewall, you can also share the resources. Like you'll be sharing like the CPU. For example, if your physical firewall is having like 16 gig of RAM, you can assign like 4 gig to a particular vDOM, 4 to another. Same thing we had disk, same thing with storage, same thing with CPU. So when you create each VLAN or each vDOM, you assign resources to that vDOM, and that makes it more easier and more efficient for small company that needs to deploy their environment in security environment. They want to deploy their company in security environment with low cost. So rather than buying a physical FortiGate with license, that will cost you a lot. So using a vDOM is more cheaper for a small company, right? So the network administrator of this company, let's say company A, the network administrator will have a dedicated public IP to access their own vDOM. So he will access the vDOM and manage it the same way the global administrator is managing the physical firewall. So he will connect on the firewall and manage it like if it was a physical device, right? He will have access to all the components that you have on a physical device. So that's it for the vDOMs. So talking about vDOMs, let's jump directly in what are the use cases of having vDOMs. So I have prepared some use cases here. So we'll start with use case 1. So here in this use case, we consider the firewall holder as being an MSP. So this is a multi-tenant managed service provider. So let's say you are an MSP and you are providing firewall services to clients. You can offer this service to your different clients, like providing them the option to buy or to rent. So these will mostly be considered as renting. So we'll be renting like a vDOM. So you can create a particular vDOM for each of your companies or your client. Let's say these are your clients. You create a vDOM for each of your clients, then you grant the access to the network administrators of each company. You just grant the access to their vDOM. So they will connect on that vDOM and they will manage it like if it was a physical device that is plugged on their network, on their internal network, right? So this is one of the advantages of having of implementing vDOM, for example. So here the benefits are that you have a strong tenant isolation, separated policies and administration. So this is lower hardware and operational cost. So as I said, each company is actually trying to get lower costs on all the assets that they are trying to buy. So offering them the option to get vDOM is it's cost effective, so they will not spend that much. So use case 2 is, for example, a company where you have a production environment, you have a testing environment, and you have a development environment. So in this case, you can separate each environment by creating separated vDOMs. So you create separated vDOMs. So each environment will be managed under a separate vDOM, a separated vDOM. So here is the idea here is to prevent like cross-environment access, reducing risk and simplifying management, right? So you don't want the traffic that is actually on the development environment. You don't want like users that are actually in development environment to have access to the production environment. and vice versa. And you don't want the users that are actually in the testing environment to have access to the production environment. So you can use vDOM here to separate the environment, preventing cross environment access. So this another use case. So this is usually used in big companies where you have like environment that really needs to be separated. So another third use case here is for departmental segmentation. So here this is usually in most cases you can also use like VLANs to resolve this issue, right? But here the issue here, for example, the advantage or another benefits of using vDOMs instead of VLANs here is if you need, for example, each of the vDOMs to have its own firewall policies, you see, at that moment, using vDOM will be more recommended in that case. If you need to separate, the environments of finance users, HR users, engineering, and also the guest Wi-Fi. So using vDOM here would be useful. So it is to enforce segmentation, to limit lateral movement and ensure that department-specific policies are being implemented on each department without interfering with what is implemented with another department. So this is another use case. So the last use case that I mentioned here is if you want to keep sensitive and regulate data in a separate vDOM with strict control. So let's say, for example, you have some companies that need to meet compliance requirement and data residency by isolating sensitive workloads in a specific environment. So rather than buying a new FortiGate or creating another environment where you need to store sensitive data, you can simply use your FortiGate device. You create a new vDOM where you are going to keep regulated data and maybe very sensitive data concerning your company. So you make sure you just put the data on that other vDOM, making sure that users who are actually working in the corporate network, they don't have access to the network that is in the other vDOM. So this is how you can create another separated environment. So the idea is that you use vDOM to create separated environment depending on the needs in your infrastructure, right? Depending on the need that you have in your infrastructure. So as have presented the different use cases, there are multiple use cases depending on your infrastructure and the needs on your environment. But as you can see, you see there are like some use cases that you see for people who already know how to use VLANs. There are some use cases here that you might think that we can use VLAN instead of using vDOM. So for now, you might be thinking, what are the benefits or what are the differences between VLAN and vDOMs? So here, talking of the comparison between the two. So I've prepared here some screenshots just to present some key differences between VLAN and vDOMs. So here we all know that VLANs are logical network segmentation at layer 2 and layer 3. So this is where VLAN applies, while vDOMs are complete virtualization of a FortiGate firewall. It means for vDOM, you are like creating a virtual firewall instead of simply segmenting your logical network. So talking about the main objectives, so the main purpose of VLANs are to separate network to network isolation. So typical use cases for VLANs are, for example, if you have, let's say for example, in your company you have users, you have servers, you have voice over IP, you have Wi-Fi. So you want to separate the traffic for each of these services. So you will probably create like 4 VLANs, one for the users, one for the servers, one for voice over IP, and one for Wi-Fi. So this is where VLANs will be needed. But in case this is where VLANs will be needed. In the other side for vDOMs, vDOM is where you really need to create separated environment. So here on the VLANs, you have all of this, but they are working on the same FortiGate device. While on the other side with vDOMs, we really need to create isolated and very separated environment. So in this case, as we saw in the previous slide, some use cases about this. So talking about the level of isolation here, as we said, when you are creating VLANs, you just for each of the department, for example, if you are in the case of departmental segmentation, you will create a VLAN for each department. But when using the VLAN, all the VLAN will use the same FortiGate, the same global configuration, they will use the same administrator accounts most of the time. While on the other hand, with a vDOM, as we said, you act like an independent vDOM, independent virtual FortiGate. So each vDOM will have its own interfaces, policies, routing, VPN, administrator, object, and logs. So here you really understand that the big difference here between the vDOM and the VLAN is that all the VLANs will reside on the same FortiGate, while on the vDOM will be like an independent virtual FortiGate on which you can create multiple VLANs, right? So this is it, for example, here on the architecture. So the architecture of VLANs is that on your FortiGate device, you create separated VLANs, and for each of the VLANs, you assign the services or the users. So you have the users, you have the server, you have Wi-Fi. While on the other hand, here on the vDOM, on your FortiGate device, you are going to create multiple vDOMs. Then on each vDOM, you can create multiple VLANs, right? Multiple VLANs, because here each vDOM can contain multiple VLANs. So that's the main difference. You have a virtual, so vDOM is the virtual FortiGate, while on the vDOM is a virtual FortiGate, an independent complete virtual FortiGate, while the VLAN stand on a FortiGate device. So for administrative purposes, as we said, most of these administrative services, let's say for example, separated administration for vDOM is always yes. Separated routing tables, separated firewall policies, separated or independent VPN users, or separated or independent logs. You will have this separated for each vDOM. So each vDOM is going to have this administrative information independently. While on VLANs, it will not be the case. Most of the time, all this information will be dependent on the physical FortiGate device or on the vDOM, because you can also create VLANs on vDOMs. So this will be dependent on the vDOM or the FortiGate device. In which case do you need to use either VLAN or using vDOM? So it is very easy to understand here. If you want to do segmentation of users, services, or reduce broadcast or organize your network, so simple deployment should be good to go with VLANs. So you have a VLAN for servers, a VLAN for users, so CCTV, VLANs for voice. So that's simple. But in case you need more complex situation like hosting multiple clients, separating production environment from lab environment, or delegating administrative access or delegating administration to other users, or managing multiple virtual firewalls, in that case you can go with vDOMs. So that's it. I hope these two slides were sufficient to present key differences between VLAN and vDOMs. So now talking about the vDOM. So the primary characteristics of vDOM. So we are going to talk about vDOM modes and the number of vDOM that you have on your FortiGate device, depending on the license that you actually have. So talking about the mode, by default you have three vDOM modes on your FortiGate device. There is the default mode, which is no vDOM. So this is the default mode on all FortiGate devices. So when you just have you buy your FortiGate device, the working mode is usually on the no vDOM. So vDOM is not enabled. So this is the default mode on each FortiGate device. So if you want to enable vDOM, you have these other two options. The first one is the split task mode. So the split task mode is the mode where you have one vDOM, which is the root vDOM, which is there for administrative management, and you have another vDOM which is for traffic management. So it means when you are in the split task mode, you have only like two vDOMs that are available, one for administrative management and the other one for traffic. So this got obsoleted as from FortiGate version 7.2 going onward. So before version 7.2, this version was still available, split task mode. So it got rid or it got removed. So in most FortiGate devices that are running FortiOS version 7.6, you will mostly see the multi-vDOM mode. You will not see this split task mode anymore. So I guess it was removed because probably they found out that it was not that useful to have a vDOM mode where you have only these two options available, right? So it means that you have one administrative vDOM and you have just one for traffic. So it does not make much sense. So I think they just think about it and they remove it from FortiOS v7.2 and onwards. So you have another option or the other vDOM mode, which is multi-vDOM mode. So here you can create like multiple vDOMs on your FortiGate device, on your FortiGate unit. So the number of vDOM that you can create here depends on the FortiGate model and the license that you're actually using. So talking about the number of vDOM, so by default, if you are running a trial license, if you have a trial license and your FortiGate device is running a FortiOS version that is previous to version 7.2, so if you are running any previous version of FortiOS that is less than 7.2 and you are using a trial license, then in that case you only have like one vDOM, maximum one vDOM that you can create. If you are running a trial license on a FortiGate device version 7.2 and later, so you have all FortiOS that came after version 7.2. In that case, you can create like two vDOM maximum with trial license. But if you have active license, or if you have a FortiGate device on which an active license was enabled at a certain time, then depending on the model of that FortiGate device, you have either 10 vDOMs that you can create or either 100 vDOMs. So it depends on the model. So if you are using a small size FortiGate model, like let's say you are using FortiGate 40F, 60F, for those small size model, you are going to have 10 vDOMs. That's the default number of vDOM that you can create on those small models. So now with the medium size and big size FortiGate devices, the default number of vDOMs there is 100, right? This for very big size FortiGate model. So if at a given moment you see that the number of vDOM that you have by default on your FortiGate is not sufficient for you and you need more, in that case there is a possibility to buy specific licenses that are related to vDOMs. So from Fortinet you can require a FortiGate license that is bind to vDOMs. In that case, you can buy a FortiGate device. You can buy a license that will let you go. Maybe if you are actually using a small size FortiGate model and you need to increase maybe like 10 more vDOMs, then in that case, you are able to buy a new FortiGate license that will help you to get 10 more vDOMs on your firewall. So talking about inter-vDOM links, so when you deploy vDOMs, by default, there is no communication between vDOMs. So that's one of the main characteristics of vDOM. But in case you need to make communication, to establish communication between two vDOMs, in that case, there are what we call here virtual links that will be implemented. So we'll see this during the labs. So also talking about resource management, as I mentioned earlier, for each vDOM, you are able to allocate resources like memory, CPU, and customize what are the number of sessions that the vDOM can support, right? So there are a lot of resources. So we'll also see this during the lab. So talking about global settings, so each time you will create vDOMs on your FortiGate, on your physical units, there will always be this root vDOM. So there will always be a root vDOM on your FortiGate device. So that's the root vDOM for management purposes. So for that root vDOM, that's where the user with the super admin user would be able, for example, to do some settings related to the physical unit, like assigning interfaces to other vDOMs, doing firmware updates, assigning or configuring DNS settings or login options. So those settings will be done from the root vDOM, because as I said, if you have, like, let's say you've created like 2 or 3 vDOMs, on each of those vDOMs you will have like an administrator account for those vDOMs. So when those administrators are connected to those vDOMs, they will manage only that vDOM or anything that is related to that vDOM. But at the top level or on the physical device, there is this super admin account that will be needed to manage everything that is related to the physical device. So that's it for global settings. Then talking about the prerequisites. So if you want to implement FortiGate vDOMs on your environment, you need to make sure that, okay, as I explained about the different modes that are available, so depending on the FortiOS version that you are actually using, you will know if you will be getting the split task mode or the multi vDOM mode, depending on the FortiOS version that you are using. So for previous FortiOS version, the only available mode most of the time will be only the split task mode. So you need to make sure that the FortiGate device that is going to be used on which you want to enable the vDOM, that FortiGate device must not be a member of a security fabric. So you need to make sure you remove the FortiGate from any security fabric before you enable vDOM on the FortiGate device. Same thing with the interfaces on interfaces, policies, and routing. So if you have any interfaces, policies, or routing that are actually running on your physical device, if you intend to use those interfaces for another, to allocate those interfaces to, or to assign those interfaces to another vDOM, you need to make sure that you remove any reference. So any configuration, any settings that are done on those interfaces need to be removed before you transfer or you assign the interfaces to another vDOM. So you just need to make sure all configuration references to interfaces, policies, and routing that are actually on the root vDOM, you need to make sure you remove those dependencies before you will be able to transfer or to assign those interfaces to another vDOM. So also about log storage. So it is strongly recommended to configure a journaling disk to store separated logs for each vDOM. So you need to make sure that the login information for each vDOM is stored in a separated location. So you can do this with maybe FortiAnalyzer or another solution. So that's the recommendation. So now let's jump into the activities and proceed. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll be doing these 4 activities. So the first activity here is the lab 1, where we'll talk about the initial setup of a vDOM. So here we're going to enable vDOM on the FortiGate device. We'll create maybe 2 vDOM, assign interfaces to the vDOM, configure IP addressing. Then we'll see how to allocate resources to each vDOM. Then we'll do some testing. Then on lab 2, what we're going to do is communication, inter-vDOM communication. So we'll see how to establish static routing and create firewall policies to establish communication between 2 vDOMs. So in the lab 3, we are going to create like 2 or 3 client So we'll say we are creating 3 vDOMs. So we'll simulate like we are doing it for like 3 different clients. Then we'll see how management of interfaces and also NAT and firewall policies they work in that case. We'll work in that case. We'll also see how to allocate or limit FortiGate resources like networking, bandwidth, and so on for each client. So at lab 4, we are going to do departmental segmentation. So as I said, I'll probably be creating two more labs related to VLAN, related to the VLAN. So we'll probably do, at the end, we'll probably be doing like six labs. So for this lab 1 initial setup, I'll be enabling vDOM on 3 FortiGate devices, so that you understand the differences between the FortiGate licensing and the vDOM licensing and the FortiGate mode. So let's jump directly on a FortiGate device and proceed. So before jumping on to the activities, so what I would like to do initially is to jump on three FortiGate firewalls. Then I'm going to display the information related to the number of vDOMs that are available depending on the trial license and the FortiOS that we are actually using. So I'll be showing this before we jump on the activities. So here I have 3 FortiGate firewalls that I'm actually using. So I'm going to present the vDOM, how vDOM is enabled and what are the available number of vDOMs that we have depending on the FortiGate model that we are running and the license that we have. So here I'm actually running a FortiGate VM with a version of FortiOS that is previous to version 7.2. So I'm running 7.0.10 here. So as you can see, this is a trial license. So this is actually a trial license that I actually have. So this is an evaluation license. So this is the trial license that you get by default, a 14-day, I think 14 or 15 days trial license that you have when you are using a previous version of FortiGate on your or previous version of FortiGate prior to version 7.2. So here what we are going to do is I'm going on the CLI from here. So I'll type get system status. Okay, so from here the get system status command will let you get information about your FortiGate device, like the version you're actually running, information about database, information about license serial number, the allocated resources, like the VM resources, like 1 CPU and the memory you actually have, other information. But what I want us to see from here is the maximum number of virtual domain that are allowed on this workstation based on the license that we actually have. So as we are using a trial license, evaluation license here, we only have 1 vDOM that we can enable from this FortiGate firewall. As I said, we are running a FortiGate version 7.0.10 and we are actually using an evaluation license. So from here, if I need to enable vDOM, what I need to do is I need to go on global config setting mode. So I'll go there through the system config global command. So when I'm here, I need to type this command set vDOM dash mode. Then from here, if I want to see the available vDOM mode that are available on this FortiGate device, what I need to do is simple to tabulate. So you can see that I have the default option, which is no vDOM. This is the default option that is, as I mentioned previously, is available. Is the default mode for all FortiGate devices when vDOM is not enabled. So apart of no vDOM, another mode is split vDOM. So you can enable split vDOM on this FortiGate device. Then on this FortiGate device also you can enable the multi-vDOM mode. So you see on this FortiGate device you have all the 3 modes that are available: no vDOM, split vDOM, or multi-vDOM. So let's say, for example, I'm enabling maybe split vDOM on this FortiGate device. So before enabling split vDOM, you notice that from here, you don't have any menu related to vDOM. So when we enable the vDOM, you will see vDOM will appear under this menu. Under the system menu, you will have the vDOM menu that will appear. So from here, I can hit enter from here. Then I hit N. Then I'll be asked to press yes to apply the settings. So I'll hit yes. So I'll be disconnected. So I need to reconnect to see for the changes to apply. So now from here, you will see now under system, you see now vDOM, the vDOM menu is now available. So also from here, you will see that if I go here under this menu, you will see now I have a global menu, a FortiGate traffic vDOM, and here I have a root vDOM. So from here, if I click under the vDOM menu here under system, you see now that I have the two vDOMs that are available. So as we mentioned under the split, for the split vDOM here, the split vDOM, you have one vDOM for administrative purpose, which is a root vDOM, and the other vDOM which is for traffic management. So here you have the two vDOMs that are available, and you can see from here, you cannot create any new vDOM. You can only edit the existing one. So from here, you cannot create any new vDOM because this this FortiGate model and license or the FortiOS version is limited to just these two versions. So now if I jump on this other FortiGate device here, so this other FortiGate device here is also a FortiGate device that is running FortiOS version 2.11. So this already version 7.2 and later version. So you also see now that here I'm also running an evaluation license. So this evaluation license, I mean these FortiGate devices, I got this evaluation license by entering my FortiCloud account on this FortiGate device for me to get the evaluation license. So this is how you enable. I guess you already know how to enable this FortiGate trial license when you want to run a FortiOS that is FortiOS version that is greater than version 7.2. So you need to have a FortiCloud account. So I'm still here under a trial license, but as I'm actually using a FortiOS version 7.2.11, so as you can see also here, from here we were able to get this new menu here that displays the different 40 or the different vDOMs that are available. So you notice that by default, when vDOM is not yet enabled, here you don't have that menu. So you can see that from here at the top corner here, you don't have that menu yet. So I'll go under CLI from here. So I get system status. So from here, as I said, is a 40 VM. So here, what the information that we need here is what is the maximum number of vDOMs that we have, virtual domains that we have. As you can see from here, we have two vDOMs that we can enable on this other FortiGate device. It means if I enable the vDOM on this FortiGate device, apart from these two vDOMs, I'll be able to create a new vDOM. So I can have up to 3 vDOMs here. One root vDOM. So each time you enable vDOM on your FortiGate device, you always have this root vDOM. As I explained previously, is for management purposes on the physical unit. But you will be able then, if on this one, I'll be able to create like 2 separated vDOMs apart from the root vDOM. So you see that from this other FortiOS that is 7.2, I can create like 2 vDOMs. I have option to create like 2 vDOMs, while on this one I have only option to create just 1 vDOM. So also from here, let's double check. So from here, if I go under config system global, then if I try to set vDOM mode from here, so here I have no vDOM. I have the multi vDOM. So you see from here, I have only these 2 vDOM modes that are available. You see, only the no vDOM or the multi vDOM, as I mentioned here in the slide. So this split task mode was removed from FortiGate version 7.2 and onward. So it only available on the previous FortiGate OS versions. So that's it so far. Then if I go now on this third one, so on this third FortiGate device here, this is a physical device. So this is one of the FortiGate devices that I use for my training. So this is a physical device. So from here, let's connect directly. So here I will type get system status. So from here you can see this a small size FortiGate model. So this is a FortiGate 60F that I'm actually using. So you see here below maximum number of virtual domains. So you see now from this FortiGate, I have like 10 vDOMs that I can create on this FortiGate device, right? As we saw in the previous FortiGate. So as I'm running version 7.2 and onwards, so from here I'll have the no vDOM and I'll have also the multi-vDOM option that will be available for me, right? So I just wanted to show you guys these differences on the three FortiGate models, because I know on your lab environment you might face one of the following situations. You might be on one of the following situations where you want to create maybe multiple vDOMs and you don't understand why you are not able to do so. So you need to pay attention on the FortiOS version that you are actually running, the FortiGate model that you are actually also using, and the type of license that you have on your FortiGate device. So talking about this, guys, I think depending on the length of this video, we might start the activities in the next video. So guys, stay tuned. Let's meet in the next video.